Buckle in your seats. The food's going to come. We're going to talk for about an hour on a variety of topics. Music down a little bit. But I just want to say, it's so nice to have everybody here on a nice night in May. This is our hometown where we're based. Some of you are from Boston, some of you are from other cities. Progress Connect, I think many of you have been involved with it over the years. It's what we started originally as a conference. We actually did the first one at the Liberty Hotel. We did the last one pre-COVID at Gillette Stadium. They've been pretty exciting. And then during COVID, as a lot of innovation came out of COVID, we decided to come to you. So we've basically been doing a dinner series 3 or 4 a year for the last sort of 2+ years, especially at the beginning when people weren't so excited about flying. We'll come to you, come to your city. We'll have an interesting topic. We've done it on fintech, enterprise software, media tech. We've done a variety of interesting dinners in a variety of cities. And it's just fun to be here tonight. I want to thank Joel for having us at the Quinn. I think some of you know it's a private club. Some of us are still on the wait list. And I think it sort of really represents sort of the new and the old Boston. It was an old club called the Algonquin, a little tired, if I might say. And kind of came in and they did more than a paint job. And it's fun to be here. It's always a special venue to be here. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank our sponsors. And they're more than our sponsors. They're really our partners. You know, it takes a family to get anything done. And these are 2 firms that we work with, both personally and professionally. We've used them a lot. I think they can be applicable to just about everybody in this room. So I want to start with Mark at Cerity, if you just want to give 30 seconds on yourself.
Everybody here, did I hear 30 seconds?
Yeah.
I was promised 2 minutes, so I might go a little bit longer. So
I'll give you a minute.
All right, good. So I thought really quickly, since my time is compressed, I'll give you a little bit about who we are, why we're here, and then why I think some of what we do might be helpful to folks in this room. So really quickly on the who. Cerity Partners was founded in about 2009, and in those short 13.5-ish years that we've been around, have grown to be one of the 10 largest RIAs in the United States. We have about $60 billion of assets under management at this point, 800+ employees, and 24 offices kind of spread across the United States. So quite a big growth trajectory. We've done that through a mix of both events like this, right? Organic growth opportunities, trying to just grow our respective practices. But also through strategic acquisitions and mergers with either smaller shops who are in geographies where we want to be, or who are bringing some type of service solution that we think would be additive to our clients. So our own Boston office, we joined the Cerity team about 2.5 years ago, though we have been kind of partners with Progress in our previous world and in the current world here. So that's a little bit about who we are. The why is most of our clients, our history here in our Boston office, most of our clients are folks, I think like a lot of people in this room, tech, life science, founders, entrepreneurs, executives. Those are our bread and butter clients. And a lot of what we do with those clients, we start early, right? The goal is to try to get in before some of the events happen, before a lot of the wealth has been created, so that we can make sure we structure things appropriately from a tax, from an estate planning standpoint. Similar to what the Progress team does, right? On the business side, you want to create the business, advise them on growth, advise them on acquisitions, hopefully maybe at some point lead to an exit, right? They're preparing the business, we're preparing the family and individuals, which is why this partnership has been good for both of us. So that's really quickly on why we're here. The last piece, so we're a full-service wealth management shop. I could talk for 2 hours about all the various things we do, but I thought I'd give you 3 quick kind of pieces that I think might be applicable to folks in this room. The first of which is a big component of what we think about when we're talking about investments for our clients are in the private market space, whether that is actually through funds or vehicles, right? Private equity, private debt, private real estate, and all of the flavors that come within there. It's a big part of what we do, and we think it's a differentiated returns or investment opportunity for folks. And importantly, because of our size with $60 billion of assets under management, we have the ability to generate some pretty interesting opportunities for clients. But because we're also a fiduciary, those opportunities are structured in a way that we think is much more aligned with our clients' interests than just us trying to push the latest product or deal, right? These are things where we're trying to get economics that are more favorable to our clients, for instance. Another piece we do in there, and again, I think applicable here, is we have a fair amount of what we call private direct investments, obviously, right? Direct investments right into companies. And we source many of those opportunities through our friends at Progress, through our clients, who bring some of those opportunities to Cerity for us to say, does this make sense for something that might benefit the 20,000 clients that Cerity Partners has across the network, and how do we structure that such that it works for those clients and for Cerity? So we think that might be the kind of the second piece that's of interest. And the last is a place where we are spending a lot of time from a growth standpoint, and that is in what we call workplace solutions or corporate solutions. And so for companies out there, be they public, private, whatever the case may be, everyone, I imagine most people here have tried to hire folks, right? And how hard it is to both attract and then retain talent. So one piece that we have been doing and doing quite well is coming on the benefits platform of a company and offer financial planning services provided by Cerity advisors through the company, either to just the C-suite, senior leaders, or even down to the rank and file, to help them make sure that they have a fully vetted and understood financial plan all the way from the executive compensation, right, all their stock options, all their various components, so they understand how they work, income tax planning, estate planning, risk, insurance, all that provided as a benefit to employees through the company. So another way that we think our clients, and we've seen this work or play out, to differentiate yourself from your competitors of what you can provide, how you can retain your talent. So a couple quick sound bites, very fast. I think I kept it to a minute and a half-ish. But if there's if you have any questions, there's a couple of us spread across the room, so please feel free to reach out, and happy to continue our relationship with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll say it again, great group of people, and you guys have been a great partner, so thank you. Speaking of good partners, for us, and more importantly, our clients, I wish everybody would use a firm like this for simply just even a quality of earnings, but more so complex with tax advice and not. We've got Greg and Chad here, and you guys have been a great partner on the accounting and tax advisory side.
Hi, everybody. Chad Robinson, Cohn Resnick. I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. But in any event, Cohn Resnick is a global professional services firm. We have offices in Boston, of course, but we have offices around the world. Classic professional services in the sense of tax, audit, consulting, advisory. Greg is with me tonight, and Greg's on the advisory side, I'm on the audit side. We work with businesses kind of up and down the chain. We work with small, emerging growth type companies, and all the way up to public companies. We work with a lot of different types of industries, a lot of tech, a lot of life sciences, real estate, and just a lot of, I'll say, good businesses that are out there. Could range from construction to retail, hospitality, things like that. So very, very broad in that regards. And also, I would say broad in regards to the size of the businesses we work with. So let me pass it off to Greg. I don't know where Greg is. Oh,
right here, Chad.
There he is. So
thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Progress and Cerity. We're really excited about this topic, and I thought it would be quite appropriate if I consulted the ChatGPT wizard to do a little introduction on myself and our firm, and this is an excerpt. So, Gregory Chin is an esteemed authority in the field of generative AI with extensive experience and profound knowledge in this rapidly advancing domain. As a thought leader and innovator, Gregory has been at the forefront of groundbreaking developments, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with artificial intelligence. His insights and deep understanding of generative AI will undoubtedly captivate and inspire us tonight. Okay, so first thing, that could not be further from the truth. I survived one semester of computer engineering at BU and then quickly transferred into the business school. So when I'm not fooling around with ChatGPT, my normal role is to partner with Cohn Resnick. I think I have pretty good job security based on the output of that, at least for the next 6 months. As we know, this is rapidly expanding and evolving industry. So what I do is help clients when they're doing deals before, after, and during a deal. So we'll do due diligence, merger integration, valuations, forensics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Increasingly, companies that we're working with, AI is top of mind, so we're very excited about this topic. I want to learn how to ferret out what's real and what's not when I'm looking at a deal, right? Because everyone says they have AI, but do they really? And what's that doing to their value? But the other area of interest for us is how do we as an industry employ this and put up guardrails, right? Because we're dealing with sensitive client data. And just within the last 3 months, my colleague Reed and I have looked at 3 different companies that say they're deploying and developing technology for firms like ours, for professional services firms to deploy AI to do what we do better and faster and more efficiently. So we need to keep up. We think this is the next iteration of offshoring. So we're excited about the industry, but also a little bit scared. So very excited to be here and to learn something tonight, and welcome and thank you. So that's all my comments.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks to all of you. Just a little bit on us. I think many of you are part of the family already. We're an investment bank and venture fund. I just wouldn't mind if everyone kind of put up their hand, or the various Progress people here. Nick's my partner. He started Progress Partners 22 years ago. 21. Rory, next to you. Dominic's our CEO, and really him and David really are running tonight, so thank you so much. Sam's been a long-standing partner on both the banking and the venture side, and is a big part of our firm. That's Sam, not you, but we'll get to you there. Yeah. Tim and I actually worked together 30 years ago at Lehman Brothers, and he's been a great addition to our Boston office and a great career banker. Another sort of strong banker in our Boston office is David Arslanian. They're on the far right. We've got Adrian, who's running our venture fund. Who else have I missed? Anybody? Okay. So, I mean, this is really what I think is unique in the core of us. Nick started, as he pointed out, 21 years ago, an investment bank that really was focused on kind of media marketing advertising. We still do a lot of that. We also do a lot in fintech and e-commerce and enterprise software. And we've had discussions in this format on those topics. About 10 plus years ago, we started a little Friends and Family Venture Fund. That's now the end of Fund 4 and has a lot of institutional investors in it, like Liberty and Sinclair and Quad and those companies as well. We're just about to go and raise Fund 5. My personal background, I came from big banks, and then I came from pure venture funds. And I think that if you combine these platforms, you can be better at both. And I think we've proved that. It's really the backgrounds of our people. Our senior people really do come from industry, a lot of them, like David and others, and Sam and Nick. And we have this fantastic executive residence program. I know a bunch of you here today. It's people who are either at sort of the end of their careers or between jobs, or more and more of them are active. But they're 120 strong. I did forget someone because Jessica's here, and she runs our EIR program. And that and kind of the background of our sort of bankers and our industry knowledge, I think really makes us unique. And we do kind of a dozen or 15 deals a year, all through word of mouth, all 100% referenceable. Some of the clients are here today, past and present, and future. Just a word on the macro market. It's been an interesting 12 months. We've been getting deals done. We did Bose, one of our larger transactions last month. Adrian and I do a bit of a macro piece. We're actually quite bullish. And if you look at the fundamentals of this economy, we're actually pretty close to what we call the Goldilocks numbers, which are 2% inflation and kind of 4% unemployment. Unemployment's a little lower than that. Inflation, you could say, is a little higher. You could actually say on a month-to-month basis, kind of there. There's a lot of sort of scary things on the horizon, just like this topic tonight that we're going to talk about. But as long as those things stay contained, I think they generally will, including the debt discussion ceilings, which hopefully get resolved here in the next week. Things are getting better. We definitely went through a lull in Q1 and late last year. But we look at sort of signals all the time, and we're noticing that every week things are getting a little better. Buyers are leaning in a little more, both financial and strategic, and we're quite bullish on sort of the second half of this year, and definitely seeing an uptick in activity as it goes on now. So that's it on Progress. Great to have you here, and let's get to the main topic. Explosive's a great word, I think, to describe this, because it connotates so much stuff, sort of exciting, scary, good and bad. I think we've got a great, it's always a fun panel, but in a simple way, you could say you've got the developer from IBM, the investor from Glasswing, and through the educator from NYU. And when I'm going to get to their bios in a minute, I think you're going to realize they're a lot more than that. And even a lot of you in the room could talk sort of a lot about this topic. It's so monumental in so many ways. And that's a good lead into my kind of my next page. I'll get to your intros in a sec. We were talking about earlier on about the wow factor of this. And we can literally talk the whole evening about the wow factor, both good and bad. And I thought that sort of this economist cover with sort of the halo and the devil is a great kind of connotation because there's so much that sort of is exciting about it. I find everything that we're in right now very exciting. And then as you sort of play it out a couple of years, you can see why that, that open letter came out of Future of Life, signed by a bunch of tech luminaries, including Elon Musk, like, hey, just pause on things. Like, we're not sure where this is going. But you can't underestimate sort of how big and momentous this has become. And just on just a small personal level, this time last week I was sitting in rural Scotland. I was 4 hours from the largest town. And I flicked on the TV. This wasn't even BBC, it was BBC Scotland. And there was a 1 hour special on generative AI, the exact topic we're going to talk about tonight. This is for like sheep farmers in Scotland. And so, this is like out of our tech chambers of New York and Boston and Chicago and San Francisco, Atlanta. It's ubiquitous. It's on the mouths of everyone. And as importantly, I always think like it makes sense to me that Apple is the most valuable company in the world because I'm wearing a watch and a phone more expensive than all my clothes. So I get that. And I also get why ChatGPT is taken off so much because it's touching all of us. We use it at our firm. My daughter uses it for her work, for school. And just the explosiveness of it all, just to put it in kind of raw numbers. They got to 1 million users when ChatGPT launched in November of 2022. 1 million users in 5 days. Just put that in perspective of Netflix and Airbnb, which typically took years. They got to 100 million users in 2 months. And they're now to 1 billion of touches. So like that kind of explosive growth you just don't see. It's become sort of the topic du jour. And I think when I think about, it was metaverse last year, and before that it was crypto, and those are still around and kind of come and went. This just feels a lot different. Back to my point about we're all touching it, it's all big. JP Morgan came out with a report about the IPO market. It's coming back, by the way. But one of their headlines was, this is from the buy side, they were interviewing people who invest in IPOs, and they said, the 2 most important things we want to hear about with companies in the long term, 2 most important things are what's their strategy to deglobalize the market. By the way, that could be a whole other topic that we'll have one night, deglobalization, and that's definitely where we're heading in a whole subtopic on that. The other thing is we want to know what their AI strategy is. And this is not just tech companies. This is service companies and non-tech companies. What is their AI strategy? And I know that you, Connor, have been going around talking to corporate execs and helping them understand like how to think about this paradigm so different than what you've been thinking about in the past. And then I'll just say on the Horn side, there was a survey that actually came out of the article in The Economist that it was a survey last year of AI researchers. And they put the chance at 5% that AI could lead to an existential threat of humanity. As in like, we're all like, now, I don't think any of the panelists share that view, and I don't share that view, but this is like weighty stuff. And not since like, we're talking about nuclear in the 50s and 60s and 70s have we kind of discussed something potentially being an existential threat. Incredible growth, as I said, in subscribers and users and the market. And Sarah's going to talk about where she's seen some investing themes and what's happening in that. Incredible growth in investing. I mean, look at that. It went up 10x just from last year to this year. But this is the part that really interests me, which is kind of who are the winners and losers. And when you think about, Nick always talks about like, we are making money by the digital transformation of how, media and whatnot is consumed. And we're still in the early innings of that, honestly, 20 years in. But just think about the companies that came out at the beginning, Amazon and Google and Facebook. That's $3 trillion in market value today. They're some of the largest companies in the world. And it's exciting to think about who will be the big winners out of this. And will it be, I was listening to talk the other day about Clay Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. I had him as a prof when I was at business school, and David, interestingly enough, a friend of the family in Belmont. But this is the stuff that we talk about in these sort of huge industry transformations. Who are the winner losers then? Does it allow the little guys, or it's just such a big person's game? Is it Microsoft made a $10 billion investment in OpenAI, not billions, billions. That you have to be a big player to get into that. So that's an interesting part of this sort of who are the winners and losers, because it's really there has a lot of repercussions, and I don't think it's just necessarily the big guys. This is interesting. This is just literally going from GPT 3.5 to 4.0 on a bunch of standardized tests. I think you've all heard these things about how they, and Greg was sort of doing his intro before, you know, and we all read articles and tried it ourselves in terms of writing notes for ourselves and emails and love letters and whatnot, and you know, these are just standardized tests. Look at the difference from 3.5 to 4 in 3 or 4 months, just in terms of the results, which was sort of mid of the scale. I mean, it was good they were running these exams, just sort of top rank. And I think this is why you can see that if you project this forward another couple of quarters, a year, it's both daunting, exciting, and a little bit scary. And that's why I think, you know, there's this sort of thought of like, let's just understand what it is and what it isn't and what's happening and how humans are using it. As I mentioned, this has sort of huge impacts for all the large players. Microsoft's probably been making the most noise. You know, you think of search, and again, those boxes earlier on, Google won that. They're 91% of the market in the US. The next biggest player is Bing at 7%. So they have a lot to gain from sort of trying to leapfrog all of a sudden. Search still is a driver of a lot of ad revenue and whatnot. And they've been making the most noise through their, as I said, $10 billion investment in OpenAI. It feels like, and I know there's some Google people in the audience, I'd love to hear the discussion later on, like, it feels like Google's always been on their back foot on this. You know, they went into sort of a code red. There's sort of other chatters I've heard. The memo that came out, I don't know if everyone's heard this story earlier this month, where it was a leaked memo that said, you know, we don't have a moat. And we're actually vulnerable not only to big players, but a lot of these little players, because it turns out you can develop these LLMs for a lot less money than you thought. So there's just how these big players sort of, back to the Clay Christensen, sort of hold their value and their strength in what's going to be a rapidly changing market, I think is a pretty exciting topic. This is, I think, the last page for me, and it's really just about sort of the various sectors. And I've talked a lot about the big players, and I think we'll get to this a little later with all these players, but especially Sarah. You know, there's a lot of emerging players, as there always is in every sort of huge technology shift. And you know, my personal view is it's not just a big player game that's going to win. There's a report I was reading the other day from Morgan Stanley, and it had like, here are the 10 companies that are going to win, here are the 10 in the middle, and here are the 20 that are going to lose. And literally, you can just rank it by market size. And I think that's back to the point that it's a big player game. I don't believe that's true. All these industries are being shifted a lot. We'll talk about that a little more in detail with this group, which gets me to this group. So, Robert, you're both a developer, a designer. You've been at IBM for 8 years. Love to hear more a little bit on your background.
Sure. So, one, thanks for having us, and it's exciting to be back in Boston. I live in Atlanta now, so you guys have cool weather compared to what we're experiencing down there. But I've spent my career as a designer first, a technologist second, because I hate being told you can't do that, so I go and learn how to do things. And I've really cultivated that into a product strategist and designer role within IBM. My focus right now is building consumer products that both drive consumer engagement and monetization strategies for advertisers for the Weather Channel, which is an IBM property. They bought us about 8.5, 9 years ago now. And scaling those. I have access to a wonderful team with tons and tons of data from a Weather Channel perspective, but I also have this vast ocean across IBM and IBM Research to experiment and look at some of the new technology that we're bringing to bear. Most recently, Watson X, AI and data. So excited about this conversation and talking with these two as well.
Great. And Sarah, thank you very much, Robert.
Yes.
Thanks for being here from Atlanta. Sarah is local with us. She's a co-investor with us at Progress Ventures. Like any good investor, you're a former operator, you're a former CEO. You're on the board of Ziff Davis, but give us a little more on yourself.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me as well. Progress is a great partner to us. We co-invested.
Your mic's not working, I don't think, right?
Oh, okay.
Not your fault.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for having me. I think I know a lot of people in this room, and I'm in awe of the EIR program that Progress has and the great people that they have participating. I also consider them to be a great partner to us as a co-investor and also as a banker and just friends in the marketplace. So, and I know there's a lot of people in the room who are very smart about data and AI. So I'm duly, respect, and any one of you can be on this panel, I imagine. So Glasswing is a venture capital firm in Boston. We are mid-size. Our Fund 1 was 112 million. Our Fund 2 was 158 million. We established to take advantage of the AI wave in 2016. At which point, when we were raising, we heard, AI? Is that a big enough thesis to focus a whole fund on? And, as it turned out, AI, as a topic is way too broad, and we narrowed our thesis to AI, B2B SaaS. We typically look for thought leadership in technology, look for companies that are helping to build the infrastructure for AI, which is one that we invested in together. And, we have watched we've participated and watched the market evolve. And I would say this was a watershed year. All of a sudden, it was like my cousins knew what I was doing.
The farmers and scholars, yeah.
AI, isn't that what you're doing? So, and we're seeing, we have had a steady flow of opportunities all along, but are now seeing the rise of generative as a category, and it's kind of interesting to watch. It's like, it's awkward and interesting times for raising Series A and things like that, but generative is on fire and almost a bubble. So
It does feel that way, yeah.
I know you guys are experiencing that too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. And Connor, you've been not only an educator on this, but also helping corporate execs sort of understand this, and it's just a totally different paradigm. And just if you could give a little bit more of your background.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay? So, what do you think? I'm good.
You got a strong voice.
You keep it. You keep that. So my name is Connor Grennan. I'm the Dean of Students at NYU Stern School of Business. I'm on the MBA and graduate side. And the story basically is that I kind of went deep into this pretty early on, and my idea was to start generative AI at Stern. And the idea there was just, why don't we really level up our MBA community, all our faculty, everybody like that, because we have all these smart people, and generative AI tends to reflect the intelligence and the experience of the people. And I thought, we're going to solve education together. And so I started, as I was building this out and teaching our students, teaching our faculty, teaching our administration, I started going out to heads of industry and saying, hey, can you talk to me about venture capital? Can you talk to me about hedge funds? Can you talk to me about healthcare, marketing, everything? And tell me what you're doing in this space, because I really want to teach our students. And it very quickly came back, that may come as no surprise. They were like, well, we're not really doing anything. We're sort of just messing around with it. I was like, oh, okay. So they're like, well, what are you doing? And so I started sitting with them and teaching them how to use this, generative AI effectively. And they're like, that's really good. Could you come and teach us? So instead of them coming to us and teaching them, I started going out and got so big that I had to have a carve out for a consulting model that I do now and a training model that I now do, which is I go out to some of the biggest firms that and I work with their executive teams and I run workshops and everything on this. And the reason around all that, just like sort of one sentence around that, is that I went out and having sat down with C-suite people for an hour and really getting them leveled up, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, this is going to transform my life. And then a week later, I'd come back and be like, how's it going? They're like, yeah, haven't really gotten back to it. I'm like, okay, so that's clearly on me. That's clearly on me. I must be a bad teacher in some way. But it really, to your point, Chris, it sort of flipped my way of thinking, which is, okay, it's not the tool. It can't be the tool, because if people could see this right away, everybody would be doing something different. And so I realized very quickly that it's not what the tool is, it's how we interact with it. And that we can talk a little bit about tonight, but that's why it requires me to do sort of like a big talk, and then really half-day, day-long workshops with with leadership teams in order to actually teach them how to do this, because it's not as intuitive. It's both wildly intuitive and not at all intuitive. It's wildly intuitive up to, let's create some butterfly poems, and not intuitive as to how are we going to change our entire industry and blow past everybody else.
And I just want to say, I just met Connor tonight, but when I heard he was going to be a panelist, I started stalking him online. He's got a great presence on this topic, but also stuff he'd done before on volunteerism and wealth disparity, like it aligned perfectly with my view of life, and I had a lot of respect for it. No, food's coming in, not at all. And I love the fact that you got a lifetime award, I think, from the Dalai Lama. Bill Murray, Caddyshack, eat your heart out. Lifetime award, Dalai Lama. Anyways, I'm actually going to work reverse to start. So I'm going to start with you. And I know this is sort of a broad topic. We all kind of in this room, as I said, we're pretty future forward in the tech thinking, how a lot of us have touched it, used it. Greg did his intro. But maybe you can just level set us a little bit on kind of, like in your own words, and you're out there teaching execs, like what is generative AI and kind of, how are expand a little bit what you said earlier on, just sort of how the business community is thinking about it.
Yeah.
And using it.
Yeah, sure. So when we think about what is generative AI, there's obviously a lot of keynotes that we could do about like generative AI, and then they give you like the bullet points. I'm not gonna do that. I want to, because the things that I do out in the world are very hyper practical. So what I want to say around generative AI is, when we think about this, this is a tool that is going to augment who you are. So a lot of times I'll go in and I talk to some of the biggest healthcare providers in the country and some of the biggest hedge funds in the country and some of the biggest private equity firms and everything else. And the first question they always ask is, how does this change our industry? And I'm like, that's not the question that we're going to talk about today, because it's not Salesforce, it's not a tool, it's not the new Excel, it's like, whatever that new thing is, like EdgeWorks or something where like you have to get your whole team onto a new system. That's not what this is. This is so much bigger and broader, and that's where we get stuck. So generative AI is a tool by which you can take your own experience and your own intelligence and augment it and solve almost any problem that you have in your field. However, there's a key to this. You have to actually know and believe that it can do that. So we can kind of talk about, where people can get stuck and the hurdles and all that. That's what I talk about when I talk about these workshops and everything else. But with generative AI, to define it, it's almost as important to define what it's not. People think it's super Google. It's not super Google. Google's super Google. Google's great. If you haven't tried Google, use Google. It's amazing. This is not a good knowledge tool. This is a phenomenal reasoning tool. So I work with a giant private bank in New York City. And one of the first things that they were saying was like, well, what we really need is like, we need to know if Denver's a target-rich environment. I'm like, well, this isn't going to tell you that. And they're like, well, I guess it's not any good. I'm like, okay, there's something between those two things. Thank God it doesn't just give you the answer, because any 12-year-old then could do your job just by putting in his Denver a target-rich environment for the private banking sector. What this does is it augments your process. It takes your process and makes it way, way better. So when I think of generative AI, it's just as useful to think what it's not and to break old habits about how we work with tools like Google. We can talk about that later if you want. You have to break that first and start again and treat this sort of like more like a human. But that's kind of what generative AI is and is not.
Great. Sarah, next to you, there's, as I said, there's sort of a lot of excitement and fear in the market. The idea of fear is not really that new. I mean, when you think about, they talk about replacing jobs, read the footnotes of the Industrial Revolution and technology, and that didn't really happen. There's always been this sort of sense of technology is going to, take over the humans that create it. There's a lot of sci-fi movies we've all watched over the last, decades. But it is a different paradigm, and I think about, medicine and aviation, and those are like regulated industries. I know you're an investor and operator, but you also have a pretty good view on kind of some of the more regulatory, and I'd like to get to you on the ethical sort of framework, but if you could just kind of give your views on that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think it's naive to think there won't be, major impacts to some types of jobs. Certainly, teams of people in India that do, customer service or, menial tasks, data gathering as an example. A lot of this is going to get, I think, wiped out. I mean, there are obviously other jobs that will be created. Will it be equal, to what's been lost? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. There obviously prompt engineering, new form of job, lots of different forms of productivity that's creative. Like some of these technologies don't necessarily take the job away from a team. they make a team like 1,000 times more productive than they could have ever been. So it's the company that's, the winner in the end in generating maybe volumes of content and automating tasks that was never possible. We looked at a company called Optiversal that automates the writing of landing pages for SKUs. So if you're Best Buy and you have 55,000 SKUs, you never hoped to have your team write 55,000 landing pages. This can do that. You've got to have people like the human in the loop that's checking to make sure that everything, is right. But the advantage to writing 55,000 SKUs is the pop you get in organic search. So it's literally like it's helping to create volumes of content where the result is felt is in Google. Yeah. So it's rather than disrupting Google, it's actually making Google more effective and productive for that kind of company. When it comes to like AI regulations and AI ethics, we pay a lot of attention to that. We think there's a lot of unintended consequences. You have to think really hard about what you're investing in. You have to think about human rights when it comes to data and all the various applications, cybersecurity, things like that. There's actually the UGAI, Universal Guidelines for AI, was something that was published in 2018, and it's meant for companies to self-regulate. I think that is...
Out of this country. Came out of the U.S.
It came out of the UN.
Yeah, it was global.
It was adopted by 40 countries, I think.
Okay. In 2018.
In 2018.
Wow.
Probably some things can be added to that list now with ChatGPT. But what's, I think, always happened is companies get together and they figure out how to self-regulate. It happened with data privacy.
Yep.
It's happened with behavioral targeting and, the ad choices that gets added to advertising. And in the case of AI, we won't have time for regulation. So this is, it's a case where I think the business communities are going to come together and try to put some rules around this.
Yeah, and maybe that's really helpful. And then, Robert, if you could expand that. I mean, I keep referencing the Future of Life Institute open letter that came out in March. EU, as always, seems to be a little further forward on this stuff, or maybe not forward, depending on your point of view. The U.S. sort of seems to be light somewhere in the middle. I'm just curious to get your view on what you're seeing.
Can we concept jump a little bit?
Yeah, cool. Please do.
Because I love what you said about jobs, and I was thinking in that moment, how many of us have kids who have learned how to code in their education? The job market of tomorrow will use these tools daily in how we execute in all walks of life, and those jobs that are lost or maybe in jeopardy will be replaced by new jobs that this technology will create. So there's a great study done, I think, in the past 2 months, out of the EU around this particular topic. And one of the concerns in that space is the job gap for the future. Not the jobs of today, but the jobs of tomorrow that this technology will help create and the technology that follows, about upskilling. So when you talk about with your teams or out in the industry about the challenges and the fear around losing jobs, it's a great opportunity to turn that on a dime. It's about upskilling and driving better progress and augmentation through what teams actually produce. Sorry. Jump back to that.
I just want to expand your last point, because I said earlier on, I got to jump too. We said we're near that Goldilocks, sort of 2% inflation, 4% unemployment. One of the reasons we're not at 4%, we're at 3.4, 3.5, is because there's a structural, in the labor market, 11 million jobs that haven't gotten filled, and it's going to get worse as the aging population and stuff like this. So I completely agree with you. We are in a situation not of fear on jobs, but that we have a population that's shrinking from an employment perspective and more opportunity.
Yep.
And
So jumping back to the ethics,
Yeah.
ethics piece, I think that the work that was done in 2018 and built upon over the course of the past few years has been great at setting foundations for organizations that are thinking about ethics. The past couple of weeks, we've had Sam Altman, IBM's Christina Montgomery, a couple others sat in front of the Senate Judicial Committee to talk about ethics and regulation and some of the concerns that come with that. As an industry, there is an opportunity for us to self-police, to self-enforce some basic principles that have already been laid forth by bodies that look at ethics through the lens of creation. But asking the government to participate is also an important component of how we move forward. Within IBM, we have an internal principle approach to how we bring anything to life. We are very focused on trusted mechanisms, developing explainable algorithms. We talk a lot about, especially in this space, that black box. We were talking about it earlier, about not knowing what these generative AI tools are doing. What are they learning inside to come out with inspiration? I find it very fascinating to not know how it can write a poem off of a simple prompt. Pickle, bear, write a poem, and it'll do it. That's all you got to give it. What is it that makes that happen? So from an internal perspective, our focus has been very deeply ingrained in trying to understand the data and the modeling that comes together to come out with these inspirational outputs. And until we get to a point where we can truly do that, this space is going to be scary for a lot.
That's a great point.
Because we don't have a regulatory way of doing it, and we don't have an actual process way of understanding it. The ethics really comes down to the data that we train on.
Yep.
The information that we put into it, and the people who help drive its intelligence on top of that, right? And so diverse teams, diverse focus on how we create products built on these tools, making sure we have many different inputs into the outcomes that we're looking to create is the best path forward. That's what's going to come from regulation. That's typically what you see in a lot of ethical approaches and ethical guidelines and principles that are applied to these types of technologies. It's our challenges. Our challenge as the business leaders who are going to drive this industry forward to really instill that in the products and the businesses that we create to make sure that they have long-standing success.
Yeah, and just thinking about like where you're sitting, you know, I talked about some of the players that have emerged from each of these transformations. Like IBM's been around forever.
Yeah.
Watson was like in the early days of AI, and like what are the guiding? You mentioned a little bit, but if you expand on it a little bit from an IBM umbrella, like you're the big corporate here. What are the guiding principles when you're thinking about AI from an IBM perspective?
So there are guiding principles that are focused on one, understanding that the data that we look at it through three main principles.
Yeah.
The data that you're utilizing belongs to the creator of the data, whether that's a human, an individual. When we think about like some of the tools that are using generative AI to come up with unique compositions, be it visual or poetic or linguistic, the data that it originated from still belongs to the creator. So when we use that to do something, we have to make sure that there's a path between those two. So our approach has been looking especially at this space at attribution and the ability to apply it. Another one is making sure that we're transparent in what's happening within it, right? We talked about black box a little bit and the inability to necessarily explain, making things as explainable as possible. And then tertiarily, making sure that we're delivering both of those with tools that actually execute against those requirements. So we've created a whole series. IBM Research has been working on these types of problems for 10 plus years around the concept of bias in AI and how we can utilize AI for self-regulation on AI, creating tools to apply in the process of both building and running models that allow us to better understand what's happening both at the input level and at the output level to drive positive outcomes and, again, better business values.
Yeah, thanks.
I just want to say, I mean, IBM has done such excellent work in this category, and as a consulting, you know, the consulting side of IBM, I'm sure that you're also pushing this out to your clients, Microsoft as well. I just participated in a year-long initiative with the World Benchmarking Alliance, which talks to the top 200 developers of AI about what their philosophies and approaches are to ethical AI, and 60% of them didn't get back to us. So, I mean, it's really good that there is this thinking, but it's, the gap does have to be closed, and it's not a national gap. It's a global gap. And, here we are, they talked about, pausing AI development to talk about it. Well, ask the Russians to pause AI development.
Right.
I don't want to be like, Houston, we've got a problem, but,
But to echo on that, it's a top-down problem, right?
Yeah.
It's when you look at the developers themselves, they're trying to drive innovation, they're trying to drive outcomes, and that's measured. So leaning on these tools and this practice they don't understand, it's a trade-off, right? So you need a top-down structure to really apply it.
And Connor, you've written a lot and talked a lot about it. It's not the tools, it's the humans and the operators. And maybe if you could expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole thing, right? So when I'm going out to places, like there's two different groups I'm talking to usually, right? There's people who are responsible for P&L and people who are not responsible for P&L. And to put them in two giant buckets, you get two wildly different answers. And so people who are responsible for P&L are like, yes, come in here, like change our whole company. And then I'll go and talk to teams who are not. And they're like, I don't know if this really works. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, because then you very quickly get to the idea that they are terrified that they are going to lose their jobs. And it's understandable. And so when I'm talking to them and when I sort of talk about, I'm going out to LinkedIn Learning out to their studios in California. They're asking me to sort of create a whole LinkedIn Learning course around AI culture and how to build an AI strategy for business leaders. And the first module that I was putting together was all about AI culture. And the first thing of an AI culture, step one, has to be building trust. Now, duh, right? That's culture. Trust is culture. Culture is trust. The problem with what we do with AI is we get so excited that we call in our whole company, we're like, look at what this thing is going to do. And there's going to be like 50 people in the audience who are like, that's my job, dude, and that's going to like freak them out. So you don't want people leaving, and most of all, you don't want people operating against the tool. So if I was like a fitness instructor, I'm like, okay, let's lift weights and let's like have healthier meals. I don't know if you're going home and not lifting weights or eating Doritos. Like, you have to be on board in the same way when you're building an AI strategy. Everybody has to be on board. So that's why step one, for example, this is just one little module of building an AI culture, is build trust. So the first thing you do is get together with your people and like, what are your views on tech? What are your views on AI? What have you heard? Like, what's the gloom and doom? What are you terrified of? And as soon as you kind of like just elevate all that and surface all that, then the message has to be, we hired you for you. We hired you because of your potential, because of your experience. All this is going to do is put an Iron Man suit on you. Do you know what I mean? Like, all this is going to do is make you a better you. If we get rid of you, then AI has to go through the people, not around the people, because you've invested in those people already. So for example, I'll talk with like learning and development teams. I could pick any example. Marketing teams is another big one. Data analysts, I don't know if you guys have used Code Interpreter. I have a video out on it. Whoo-wee! Code Interpreter is crazy, and it's going to terrify data analysts. But if you're a data analyst, forget I just said that. But with something around like learning development, right? Learning development is huge in companies, right? But what they do is they spend 80% of their time building curriculums, building workshops, everything like that. And they're looking at this tool, they're like, you just did that in like 20 minutes or something like that, right? So what you have to say is, that's not going to be your job anymore. Your job is going to be condensing that from 80% of your job down to 15% of your job. And then you're actually going to be able to use your prefrontal cortex and actually upskill individuals and look at skill gap analysis for individuals in the company, and that's going to be your new focus, not getting everybody in a classroom. You can iterate workshops on the fly. Again, small example, but you see what I'm saying. People who are most sort of vulnerable to this, the first thing you have to do is talk to them and say, this is about the humanity of it. Because if it was just about the tool, everybody would be flying with this thing. And I'm telling you, I work across industries. Very, very, very few companies are flying on it yet.
Yeah.
I think it is about the refining that has to take place. Nobody gets something perfect back the first time. Exactly. Everybody remember what the early days of the web were like? Like, we were all like, oh, this is amazing. But when you look back on it, it's like really crappy. Mm-hmm. Has anybody seen like the first page of Yahoo or, what the website used to look like? And it is going to get better over time, but the important thing, I think, for companies is to get their feet wet and to just iterate. It does learn your style and people get better at it over time.
It's one of the reasons there's a whole cottage industry right now around prompt engineering. If you've seen this, there are websites that are spinning up that promise better prompts, right? How do you design a better outcome? That becomes a skill that is really, really, really valuable in the course of the next few years. From a design perspective, just thinking on what you were riffing on, IBM runs a global studio of design studios all across the globe. There's like 82 of them. As a practice, one of the things we're trying to do is educate our designers around the fact that these tools are not going to impact their jobs, right? We're talking about generative AI from large language models, but also from DALL-E and Midjourney and some of these tools that are becoming available to create art. Designers see that as a huge threat. Unless they can open their mind and see, actually, it empowers me to do so much more. The amount of time it takes me to comp something as a designer and the ability to just craft the right prompt to get me a thing so I can just give a suggestion of what this is and get buy-in is huge. It would unlock budgets much more quickly. In the advertising space, I know that's always a challenge because we go in with a great idea and we try and sell it, and everybody's like, that sounds cool, but I have no idea what this is going to look like, and we have to go back to the drawing board and spend two weeks coming back with what that visual is. This solves that problem, right? So it's empowering those roles to see the value of these tools and how they're applied to driving greater value for the organization as well as the individual.
That's great. I've got a list of 30 questions. They're not AI generated, in case you're wondering. But my guess is there's some good thoughts in this room, and I think you're starting to appreciate how powerful this group is in this panel. So I'm going to ask a question to Sarah, but then I'm going to keep coming back to this group and see if they have any questions. Your day job, you guys all have sort of very rich backgrounds, Sarah, is as an investor. This sort of touches everything in every way. As you said, you sort of had to narrow it down and your focus a little bit. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of how you think about investing, and a little bit also what I said earlier on, which is like, this is not necessarily all the foils are going to go to the big guys, and it's for some of the emerging players you see.
Well, every company is an AI company, right?
Right.
And so we look at a lot of different models and a lot of very interesting business concepts that apply AI. But when we look at when we look at a business and we think of it as investable, we want there to be true thought leadership in technology and real invention. So a new method of AI being applied or some proprietary technology that is changing the game of what can be done. So like half the businesses in the world are, come to us and say, we're going to build this amazing, marketplace, and when we have enough data, we're going to apply that, and it's going to predict and recommend. And that's not necessarily what we don't feel like that's where the game is for us, or there's not a lot of differentiation. We are also B2B investors, and we happen to be East Coast, so we're a little bit conservative, and we like to invest in businesses that can gain traction pretty early on, enterprise-oriented, really finding a vertical pain point often, or something that's infrastructure related. Like, if you think of, okay, data is the lifeblood of AI algorithms, the reality is it's not that easy to get to data today. Like if you want to buy data to enrich your data set, it can be a very long process of buying data segments, and it's a manual back and forth process. So the access to data needs to open up, and we're in several things. One is with Progress is narrative, which it makes access to data in real time at the raw level possible, and somebody can be up and on the rails and enriching their data in real time. We invest in another one called Chaos Search, which allows you to access your terabyte of data in cold storage, not have to bring it to hot storage. You can search and access it there. It's also very oriented toward data scientists who are applying to their algorithms. And then we're looking at lots of generative ideas. I will say that the valuations around generative are pretty hot right now. Like I was just talking to someone in town who's building a generative video platform, and I was like, hey, we should be talking, you know, what's happening? Where are you with that? She was like, well, it's 30% built, and we're getting some of the big players in Hollywood to invest $20 million in it. I'm like, oh, wow. That sounds interesting. We might have missed the boat on that one, or, you know, I don't know.
Can you start these companies for millions of dollars, or is it like, in terms of the invested capital that needs to go into them? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why the old model doesn't apply, but I think maybe they see themselves as having like a super huge opportunity, like Midjourney or like a Lensa or something like that, to get out there and be well known. You know, there's another one. Some people probably know Omar Tawakkol, who was the founder of Blue Kai and then later Voicea. He's launched one called Rembrandt, which is it's generating images to appear in videos, and you know, that's another one with like the olden days kind of valuation that you would have seen, you know, somebody giving him 32 right out of the gates, but.
And one thing just on that too, it's so, I mean, Midjourney, like you probably maybe you all know Midjourney, but Midjourney is the best tool out there, I think, for image generation. I think Midjourney is like 11 people. Like these are companies that, you know, you're talking about new, massive companies, and the resources are not going to go into human capital. They're going to go into the machines and tokenization, everything like that. But like these huge companies are between like 1 and 20 people, a lot of them. That's number one. Number two, around data, this is when we actually have to start thinking about data in a whole new way, because what it used to be, and we were talking about this a little before, you know, we need new information, right? So all of a sudden Reddit is shutting down their API, and Twitter, meaning like they're shutting down access to their information, right? So because they're like, oh my gosh, this is actually super, super useful, and OpenAI was just scraping all this and everything else. But here's the thing that is not being paid enough attention to, I think, which is data sets do not have to be as large anymore, because now with the new ways of looking at this, and I really encourage you, well, you probably won't have access to Code Interpreter yet, but when you start messing around with this or just looking at videos on how Code Interpreter work, I made one myself. Here's the thing about that, and what Stanford did around sort of like building their own LLMs, everything. You can take a much, much smaller, they used to think that they would need like 100,000 pieces of data to really have a robust thing. They're finding they can do it on like 5,000 pieces of data. So even in terms of buying data, and you think you have to buy these giant data sets, it's true, but almost part of that is just to keep it from your competitor rather than anything else. But you can start doing things on much smaller sets of data because of the power of how this processes data as well.
Can start with a single document.
right.
I mean, to be honest, right? To get true value out of one document and scale it.
Yeah.
I have, go on.
I was going to say there is an advantage to keeping a proprietary data set. We were talking about sort of the advantages and the disadvantages of letting GPT train on your data. Right. And you know, in some ways it's good because it will be more accurate about your company. If you're a publisher, you have the opportunity to not let it train on your data, and then you have a really trusted data set to allow your own platform to train on, and you know, also integrate with the rest of GPT and LLMs to generate content. But like, I'm on the board of Ziff Davis, which, you know, it's a very trusted content. You know, that's part of their brand. You know, they've been asked by analysts like, oh, are you worried about GPT disrupting your business? It's like, are you kidding? Do you know how much content is already out there that we compete with? We are an established brand. Trust is the reason why people read our content. And yeah, we can definitely pump up the volume on that content and scale it, but keep the proprietary part of it to ourselves.
As the Weather Channel, we've taken the same approach. One of the most trusted brands in the country when it comes to like delivering information We want to make sure that the information that when we're using these tools, that we're generating is grounded in science and reporting based on science. So we've taken sort of the same tact with the content itself. On the other end of the spectrum, the data we're being playful with, right? We're experimenting with. To potentially create more content, create more value for our readers, but again, grounded in that trust space.
Okay, I got 28 questions really good, but I know there's some questions in the audience, so I knew you'd be the first, Joel. I knew it.
First of all, I want to applaud the panel. It's the first panel I've ever seen where each of you look exactly like your photos on the screen. I mean, big thumbs up. So congratulations on that. One little shout out I want to give is Connor. I have a deep background in AI, and I learn a lot from 7 minutes each time on your YouTube videos.
Thank you.
I swear, anybody wants to get smart on
Just go to his LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and he's got all his videos.
the
there.
code
They're
interpreter
fantastic.
one, like
Yeah.
you said, is fantastic. But one thing I want to pick up on, each of you said something, alluded to it, and Chris, you said it explicitly. You said you were reading a Morgan Stanley report recently about AI.
Yeah.
Everybody, there are 10 reports a week from people writing about AI these days.
Yep.
Who has gotten it right up until now? Because those are the ones we can really think about and trust. Because everybody's writing about, basically, here's what we're seeing today. But who has really been ahead of the curve should we be listening to now, given that you guys have such a broad perspective on things?
So reflecting on all the metaverse reporting from last year, how that didn't quite play out as we thought it would.
Yep.
Man, that's a tough one. I think there's been a lot. So in my world, I get the opportunity to work with a deep bench of developers and data scientists and engineers. And then I work with these product strategists and people building products. And oftentimes we debate what the right path is. We've taken a practice of sharing papers. I tend to look at academia because I feel like they're the ones who are really pushing the core edges that we begin building on. If you look at all of the models that a lot of this tooling is built on, they all came out of academia, right? So I think when you look at the papers and then you start to see validation and progress, you see a really nice underlying sort of sequence of events that you can build on. I don't know that I've seen anyone nail it across like the different sort of like analyst approaches really well. You may have different opinions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all you can do to keep current, right? And just talk about what's happening. I love the Hard Fork podcast. I'm trying to think what else. Rudina writes her AI Atlas.
Yeah, go on, I have a view.
Just real quick on that, yeah, it's a great point. So I don't know how you guys are. Like, I just don't sleep a ton, right? So and I'm not being facetious. Like, I have my day job as a student. I do this now like 70% of my time. But I try to look at everybody, and I just sort of try to aggregate what everybody's saying because people are coming out. I will say sort of like one thing that I've learned, which is anytime you see a demo that looks a little too good to be true, look at what the underlying research paper is, and usually that makes you go sort of like blind. Don't worry. Chat PDF, Humata, places like that. Grab that, throw it in there, and with faster than you can think, it will tell you what that paper actually says. You can say like, what's actually actionable right now, everything like that. So this makes us all like deep empirical researchers in a way that has never been possible before.
So the models themselves are getting it right.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, actually, it's been really good. I'll just say, coming in 1 sec. The Economist, honestly, has been a great sort of smart journalism in summarizing a disparity of views, and in my opinion, kind of with a point of view landing a bunch of stuff. Joelle.
Yes.
Our host.
So Joelle Maroney, Linkia Influencer Marketing Technology. So last week, just coming in on the heels of the Ad Week, Social Media Week at the TWA at JFK, which everybody has to experience if you haven't. So influencers, 66% as a data point of influencers are using AI now. And it's a repeatable process to scale. So I'd love for you to touch on, the pace of how quickly this is going to scale even further between where are we now in May versus end of year? Because I think we're not talking about the trajectory of how quickly the pace of play is going to be for our businesses.
There's a Daft Punk song. I'm aging myself a little bit, but I love Daft Punk. Bigger, faster, better, stronger is like good rhythm too. I think those who know will have that mantra going into this, and like that report was fantastic, thinking about how they're using these tools to better their businesses so they have more time to live as humans, because a lot of influencers devote their lives to their business, right? So thinking about how they can apply these tools, I think it's going to be that type of mantra. If you have the drive to be better at what you do and do more in the world with what you can, like bigger, faster, better, stronger, you'll figure out a way to use these tools. We're already like in our team building practices to free up time, kill meetings. Like we can solve all this with tools to process documents and understand the gist and just move on, right? Like can we eliminate some things so that we can make new things? I think is going to be a huge piece of all of this.
Yeah, real quick on that, there is, I think, a flight to quality on this to a certain extent too, which is really cool. So I haven't seen a meritocracy like this in a long time, right? So do you guys see like 50 great tools that you can use, like AI tools? Those things, if I could strangle a piece of paper, I would. Because it drives me nuts, right? Like who's using 50 AI tools? Nobody. It's more just like, look at all these things, and people bookmark it because it's like aspirational. Someday I'm going to get to it. Within months, a lot of those will be gone, right? And so that's the problem. So it is very much like the internet bubble right now. It's like cheesegraters.com is changing the way we buy cheese graters. So there's all these different tools that are doing all these different things, but ultimately, people are smart, and people are finding the one that works, and they're sharing it in social media and everything else. And to Sarah's point, trust is sort of at the heart of all that.
Right, and I mean, let's not forget too, is the rise of the creator economy, what you talked about with jobs and the fact that there are so many jobs open, part of the reason is that something like 60% of Gen Z has a side gig or a side hustle. They're creating their own businesses. They're kind of saying to corporate America, talk to the hand, I'm doing this. Yep. So there is, I think, there's a market for a lot of these things, or people are trying them out, and there is the ability for a lot of things to exist. Mm-hmm. I think there will be a shakeout eventually, but.
Yeah, it's true.
Hey, yeah. So one thing you said, which it's been, I mean, I'm not in AI day to day. I work in tech, but not specifically AI. But it's been kind of amazing to see, it's like 6 months, and suddenly there's like 100 companies doing generative AI. Even if they're not 100 good companies, it feels like there's 10 which are pretty good. And they came up in the last 6 months. So, and AWS launched their own thing now, and everyone's kind of bringing their own thing. Is it just easier to do than it looks like? Or how can it be that it came up so quickly? Because it came from like GPT to everyone has an AI in 6 months. So how is that the technical problem is not that big, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, I mean, I could just sort of speak to that first, which is people are using this model and building off really powerful models. So a couple of things. So first of all, there's already OpenAI and everything else, and that was allowing people to use that model. But this whole article that Chris was referencing earlier, like we have no moat. So Google has no moat, Microsoft has no moat. Yes and no, right? I mean, like to your point about trust, I hate to keep coming back to it, but Google has search. They have, I mean, whatever the number was there, 92% of searchers.
91%, yeah.
Yeah, that's not insignificant.
No.
So when we say like, well, open model, open source stuff is going to be better, it is. It's going to be better very, very quickly. However, do they have an interface like that? Do they have like Google? Like, does anybody going to that? I don't know. But to your point, where this really figures in is all these companies starting up. They're like, what's that? Do you know what I mean? Like, and they have access to open source. And so all of a sudden, people are just standing on the shoulders of giants over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And what I'm finding is user experience is really leaping to the top of this a lot. So you can have this phenomenal model, and you guys know this better than anybody else. If you have the best user experience, that is going to attract so many people. And again, I work with I won't say which hedge fund, a giant hedge fund in this world. And they have, they're picking the winners and losers in AI. And we were talking about, that is so hard right now because The tools that I used 3 weeks ago were garbage, and so I went over here, and then I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to try that, and I can give you examples, but that one has flown past. So they're all building on this technology.
You also alluded to, sorry. Okay. You alluded to something in there as well about the quality. Speed and quality are going to be things that we're going to, like, it's going to be kind of a turbulent time. There's a lot of people looking to recreate things that we already have, like a better mousetrap, if you will. The ones that are really, truly, like, stepping over the line, like over the horizon line, are the ones that are looking at these tools and spending a little extra time with them and doing something new and novel, right? Finding that crispness in these tools and how to apply them is the huge challenge. They'll rise to the top. That's a more technical problem than just taking the technology and throwing it at a problem that exists today, like digesting a PDF, right? I already have to do that. There are some tools that kind of do that. This does it better.
There is a gold rush opportunity, though.
Indeed.
I know a kid. He dropped out of Rochester. He didn't want to pay the college bills and graduate with debt. He went to work for a live person. And he's, anybody interested, just let me know. He's doing some consulting. But he's one of these who has a side hustle. He's used generative technology for the big Minecraft games to dissect who made what move in the game, and he's publishing that on YouTube. It's his own little YouTube channel. The kid is 20 years old. And every time he does that, he makes about $2,500. Wow. Like, it's, of course, not VC investable, I think, at this moment, but it's, like, he just came up with the idea. He likes gaming, and he could do this, and, did it nights and making money.
Okay, so sadly, last question.
Better be good.
Twilight hour.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you all for doing this. I'm Mike Green. I'm with Backlight. And I think my favorite part of the discussion was where Robert talked about the rules at IBM for attribution and then transparency. Yeah. And then it jumped to Sarah, and she talked about the survey where 60% of the people wouldn't tell what rules they're following, if any. So I kind of wanted to ask, like, where are we going to land on that with respect to people's music or video or other things being subsumed into these models?
I mean, I have one theory on that, which I'll get to quickly, and they get to these guys. So, because we were just talking about it just before, Mid-Journey and everything, like, all these things are grabbing just copyrighted stuff. And it's sort of like the Russian oligarchs in the 90s with oil companies, right? It's just like, grab what you can. And I don't want to say it's a hope, I don't want to say it's a fear, anything like that, but we were talking about Adobe Firefly, which is a very powerful model, which is, sort of Robert was talking about a little bit about how they have their own, images and everything, which are, they're not copyrighted, right? They can use them. And their theory of, work, I think, here is that we'll build this, and then we're going to be the last one standing when everybody else gets regulated out or something like that. And it's Adobe, so they're not some tiny startup. But what I will say is that when you have, OpenAI doing this with DALL-E, when you have Mid-Journey, when you have all these places doing it, I have a very hard time imagining that these places are not somehow going to get grandfathered into something. Sort of like Mickey Mouse copyright style, where they're like, what are we going to throw away all this? But also, if you look at what the Copyright Office is doing, and you have to dig kind of deep on this stuff, hence us not sleeping very much, but if you go really deep on it, like, technically, if you write something, if you write a work of something, and you use generative AI, that is not your copyright. That's technically true, right? So, and that freaks everybody out. Now, can they tell? No, I live in academia. Like, you can't tell what's AI and what's not, whatever, regardless of what people say. Anyway, it's a huge issue, but I think they're going to solve it to the benefit of the big players. But I don't know if you guys have a different thought on that.
Well, there are some police. One of them is an organization called PRI, that's Principles for Responsible Investing. Glasswing is a signatory. They're partners with World Benchmarking Alliance, which is how we got involved in that initiative. PRI has 121 trillion in assets under management. That is 1/2 of institutional capital in the world. And the whole idea of it is that investors will ask the hard questions to the companies that they invest in, primarily public companies. Also private investors as well are, can apply the principles responsible investing. But I have been on some of these calls where, there's $1 trillion on the call, asking questions to the management team of, well, how do you think about digital human rights with your technology systems? And they have to answer that. And that is, so ESG policies, DEI policies, technology policies, ethical AI, it's starting to be questions that these businesses have to answer to the people who invest in their companies. Money talks. And I think that there's some good in the world that is really going to try to affect some change in this.
I think as large businesses specifically will drive this because we'll need large-scale transformation. Small businesses will probably reap the riches from it.
Yeah.
The opportunity to really cultivate and curate the data that these models react to is the future of building better foundation models. That's essentially what they are. I'm not here to pitch IBM products, talk about generative AI, but that's what we're focused on, is curation of the data and the things that we're training these models against to make sure that there are no commercial license. If there are commercially licensed agreements that drove this data, we've signed them and you're benefiting from that as a partner of ours, right? If there's not, it's being removed from the models, right? We're using these approaches, and you'll see more and more of this coming, where businesses can bring these types of tools to bear and trust everything that's within them. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, we're grandfathering in these approaches and allowing us to all run wild with them. Think about how, the depth of value that Google has with what they're trying to create, right?
That's a wrap.